Hey everyone, it's Baritha Yoga, and I'm here in this review for Stans, the new documentary directed by Stephen Leckhart, and chronicling the personal life and the musical career of Eminem. But with a twist, it is told through the eyes of his fans, or shall we say stans. Now, Eminem is a polarizing figure, and he's also a supremely popular figure as well. He's one of the biggest and one of the highest selling musical artists of music history. He is one of the greatest rappers of all time, and I think he still holds the distinction of being the highest selling musical artist in the rap genre. I don't know if that's still true with Drake being so prevalent nowadays, but at one point, Eminem was the biggest rapper of all time history. And what's interesting is that this documentary could have gone the traditional route of chronicling his career through his eyes only and through like other people around him in the industry. But this documentary has a big twist towards it, and it's kind of a little bit disturbing at times. It is told through the eyes of his fans and, shall we say, stans. And it's pretty good. It's a very different way of chronicling a very famous person. But again, in my personal opinion, it gets a little bit disturbing. Now, stan culture, or the word stan, has originated from the famous song Stan, which in my personal opinion is Eminem's best ever work. I know a lot of people would say Lose Yourself, or Will the Real Slim Shady Please Stand Up, or any of the songs from his the beginning of his career. But Stan is a powerful song because it tells you the toxicity and the kind of obsessiveness that some fans have towards an individual or a thing, or just in general. And it's an incredible song. It's, in my personal opinion, one of the greatest songs ever written in the last 25 years to 30 years or so. And because of the popularity of that song, because of the impact of that song, Stan has become part of the lexicon of vocabulary for people to use in terms of an obsessive fan or a really indulgent fan. And we get to see that a little bit here. One of the best things about this documentary, and I'm very thankful for this, is that most of the fans that are chronicling Eminem's life throughout this documentary are very self-aware of their fandom for Eminem. You know, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be a fan of something, because it would be very hypocritical for me to say that, because again, this page, Views of Cinema, is pretty much chronicling my fandom or my love for Tamil cinema and also English cinema. Cinema in general. I love cinema. I love film. I love music. I love sports. But that is not my life. I have things that I do in my life outside of these things. And my whole life does not revolve around film in general. Yes, I watch a lot of movies and I review a lot of films and I talk about a lot of movies. But outside of this page, I have things that I do. I have a personal life that I have, so on and so forth. Most of the fans here are very, very, very ardent fans of Eminem. But thankfully, they're very aware of their ardent nature towards their fandom for this individual. And I don't want to say who, but there are certain moments in this documentary where I had to take a step back and I had to take a break from watching it, because they say certain things or they do certain things which I'm like, that's kind of teetering on a little bit of a creepy nature. And Eminem actually says this too in the documentary. They go to his old house that's famously, immortalized in one of his albums, on the album cover. And they say that the city of Detroit took that home before they were able to buy it back from them. And the interviewer behind the camera says that, a lot of your fans, make pilgrimage to this place. How do you feel about that? And he's like, it's kind of cool, but it's kind of weird. Because he's like, that's my personal life. It's not their life. I don't understand why, they're doing this, because that's what I had to go through, not what they had to go through. I'm paraphrasing, but he does say that it's a little bit weird what certain fans of his are doing. And I appreciate that, because again, Eminem thanks his fans at the end of this documentary. He says, without them, obviously, he wouldn't be the person that he is. And without their support, he wouldn't have gone through a lot of the trials and tribulations that he did in his career. But he also mentions that, some of these fans are taking things a little too extreme, and there are certain fans in this documentary, you can see it in their eyes, they need a little bit of a break from Eminem. Not to deviate from this documentary, because this documentary is very solid and I give it a 9 out of 10. But I'll give you some examples of when fandom gets a little bit too much. Now, there's nothing wrong with loving a film. There's nothing wrong with getting a tattoo of, a movie that you like, or an individual that you like, or a musician, or their lyrics that you like, so on and so forth. Some people have tattoos of a brand that they love. I've seen a person have a tattoo of Taco Bell, for example, right? And, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, it might be strange for some people, but, people love what they love, and they love it in certain ways. But there's extremes to certain things, right? So, again, not to deviate from this documentary, but I've seen, I've heard, and I've read some very extreme fan culture that gets a little bit too creepy and a little bit too obsessive and a little bit too disturbing. Now, not to deviate and go on a tangent outside of this documentary, but I wanted to give you some examples of what I feel is a little bit too obsessive and a little bit too disturbing of fandom, in my personal opinion. Again, there's nothing wrong with rewatching a film millions of times, or listening to an album millions of times, or getting tattoos of a brand, or of a person, or of a film, or of, lyrics of a song. That I think that is okay. I think that is a beautiful thing, because sometimes certain things mean different things to certain individuals. They give them hope. They give them a light at the end of the tunnel, which I think is a beautiful thing. And I think that people should appreciate and show their love for something through those manners. But again, there's a limit and there's extreme to certain things as well. So I'll tell you some examples of obsessive and disturbing stories that I've read, I've heard, and I've seen firsthand when it comes to extreme fandom of an individual, a brand, or a thing. So there was a story back in the day, and I forgot for which film, but a certain star, their film was flopping in the box office, and a fan of that star, I think he sold his bike, or he sold something in his house that was a lot of money. He bought every single seat in a theater for, I think, a weekend or a week, just to make sure that the film wasn't going to flop or wasn't going to lose as much money as it did. And, the star of that movie, I think they heard about the story. They didn't even say thank you or anything. And, it got to a point where when I was hearing that story, I was like, that's a little too much, And I think the cost of those tickets amounted to a couple thousands of dollars, I think. But yeah, kind of weird. I don't know, in my personal opinion. Now, I've seen pictures and I've also seen videos of fans who've made temples or churches for the person that they love. Again, you do you, but, perceiving someone as a god or goddess is a little bit extreme, in my personal opinion. I don't know. It just, there's love, and deifying someone like that, I don't know, I just feel kind of uncomfortable with that. Yeah. Not to get into specifics about this story, because I think it's probably one of the most disturbing ones I've ever read, but a certain fan was a big fan of a certain individual, to the point where they were going to go into very disturbing extremes in order to make sure that this individual was going to get an organ or, a medical procedure done in order to make sure that individual was going to be okay. And that star had to tell their bodyguards or their team, just in general, to go to that person and say, stop it. I have the financial means to make this happen. Don't do this. You don't need to make this happen. It's okay. I'll be fine. You could probably Google it. I think that the story is probably still online, but yeah, it was a very disturbing story when I read it back then. A simple Google search or a simple YouTube search will give you some sort of idea to the extremes that some fans will go towards a certain thing. And thankfully, most of the fans in this documentary are not to that extent. They're self-aware, and I'm very thankful for that. And at the end of the documentary, Eminem, again, thanks them for their fandom and thanks them for their support, and, vice versa. They thank him for giving them hope and, stuff that they can relate to. But yeah, overall, this is a very interesting documentary about parasocial dynamics in entertainment. I give it a 9 out of 10. It's solid, but it will stay with me for a little bit.